breaking down everyday workplace issues and diagnosing the hidden sickness, not just the obvious symptom. Our hosts, James and Kobe.
Did we lose a patient?
No, that's just my lunch.
Hey, thanks for joining us. I'm Kobe, he's James. So let's get started with a question. What lessons can we learn from 2022?
Oh boy. How do you condense an entire year into 30 minutes? I think what we want to do is actually look at what are kind of two or three big pieces that we can pull out of kind of some of the things that have been going on in 2022. I think one of the where I want to start is actually building on our conversation from our last episode, because there's a lot of things that have gone on in 2022 that really accentuate our conversation around the fragile grip principle. Right. And that's definitely a big one that I think we can learn a lot of lessons from. But we'd be remiss if we didn't stay topical on what's happening right now, or at least what's been happening over the last several weeks, and talk about call it what you want, flaming dumpster fire, or real-time case study that is Twitter.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think that actually that's probably an excellent place to start for one. But it's also, I think, going back to the fragile grip principle, which was, the idea of the fragile relationship that exists between employers and employees, and that the way that you handle that fragile relationship is a great sign of your long-term success. And one of the options in the fragile grip principle is what we call the harsh grip, where you squeeze too tight to maintain control. And I think that there really couldn't be a more, or a larger example of the harsh grip than what has happened with Twitter and Elon Musk.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost too good of an example, because it makes the argument way too easy. Yeah. And to be clear, like, we're going to use this example because it's happening right now. Everybody is paying attention to what's been going on with Twitter, whether you subscribe to Musk's leadership style or not. People are paying attention. So it's a really good example to kind of dive into. But to be clear, this is not the only way that the harsh grip plays out in businesses. This is almost cartoon villainish example of the harsh grip. If you haven't noticed yet, you can probably pick up where I fall on the pro or not pro Musk conversation. So let's talk a little bit about what's been going on there, and we'll start with kind of just before Musk acquired Twitter, and kind of so the media machine that is Elon Musk was talking about how he's going to take this unprofitable company and make it a world leader. It's going to be profitable. It's going to be a beacon of free speech. It will be the next generation, it will evolve into this ultimate social media platform for good. That's a lot of how, not in that language, but that's a lot of how the arguments or the conversation was presented in the media. What happened is, as soon as the business was acquired, massive layoffs happened across many, many key fundamental departments. We're talking even things like the moderation teams. being completely destroyed on Twitter, which already has a bit of a reputation for being a hot mess. Communications, PR, development teams, like everything just started getting slashed. People were being fired. People were being fired over Twitter. Anybody who was working for Twitter and did not subscribe to the Musk Kool-Aid, he would fire his employees over Twitter, no questions, just done.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of things that happened in intervening weeks. One of the things that I kind of the piece that really exemplifies the harsh grip is what happened when he sent out these mass company-wide emails saying that, you know, we all need to be hardcore. You know, you're going to be working long hours, you're going to be working really hard, and you're going to help save this company. There were articles and pictures of people sleeping at their desks because they didn't have, like, because the workloads were just so incredible. You know, their teams have been cut, but the work hasn't gone away. And this email comes saying, you're not getting anything out of this, but I'm going to force you to work harder, and I'm going to force you to work longer hours, and it's all going to be for the benefit of me and the shareholders.
Right.
So what did this highly skilled group of employees do, with not only highly skilled, but with a skill set that is in high demand? They took them severance right before Christmas and left.
Yeah.
Right. The you know, squeezing every single drop of productivity out of people, as we've talked about, like, this exemplifies that harsh grip of, I don't know what to do, so I'm going to just hold on tighter. It drives people away.
Yeah, and I think a good way to like almost like the psychology behind the harsh grip, and maybe even if I had to, like, you know, say what I thought Elon Musk must have been thinking, a lot of this was he kind of saw himself as the hero, as the knight there to vanquish the enemies, which unfortunately he was the hero, and those he had to protect were almost those who were banned from Twitter previously, or, you know, or the, you know, and the people that were, you know, like were had their feel like they had their speech, you know, like taken away from them, their free speech.
Right.
Those, you know, he was the heroes. I mean, they don't have shareholders because he's the only owner. It's him and the people that feel were left out of Twitter for whatever reason, and their speech was taken away. They were the heroes, and the villains were employees. They were what was standing in the way of Musk's vision and free speech for all attitude that he had. And so he had to crush the villains in order to be the hero. And I think that is kind of, again, it's a very cartoony way to describe it, but that mentality, that psychology, or that psychopathy almost, is kind of where the harsh grip kind of grabs hold on people. Sometimes it's what have I done? I don't know how to handle this, like you said, so I'm going to squeeze tighter. The more control I have, the better I can handle this unfamiliar territory. Or sometimes it's just a matter of, well, the employees are the villains, so I have to vanquish them. I have to control that, to own them, and that's how we'll get to what I want this to be. And I kind of think that's again at the heart of a lot of, you know, a lot of, I mean, because Musk is a brilliant guy, but he's not, but I wouldn't necessarily say that he, you know, that being intelligent and being a good leader are not the same thing. And he's really taught the world how visionaries can be, you know, great in some areas and terrible in others, and leading people and building sustainable leadership practices and organizational structures and cultures and habits is something that you can't just figure out as you go. You have to have that as a core fundamental part of the way that you understand the workplace. Otherwise, you end up squeezing the life out of people.
Yeah, and I mean, what fascinates me about Musk kind of put out this call to the big advertisers who were using Twitter's platform, asking them what Twitter needed to do to be better, which is a great initiative, something that as a new leader coming in, going to the people who are using your platform, who are your customers, and saying, what can we do better? Fantastic. This gentleman, who the vice president of a major advertising company that represents some of the biggest brands in the world, wrote this incredibly articulate response outlining why he felt that advertisers were starting to pull out of Twitter, and what Twitter needed to do to reassure people that it's valuable to actually continue to put money into it. Musk blocked him.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it's the same mentality. And it's this, I'm always right. I'm going to do what I feel is right. And I'm just going to keep hanging on and squeezing every bit of value that I can out of something. Whether you do it when you do it with your employees, they will leave, as we've seen. When you do it with your customers, they will leave, as we've seen. Like, Twitter is just a phenomenal case study for what not to do in leadership.
Yeah. And I think that it's not that the harsh grip concept is the only thing that's happening with this, but I would definitely say that the fundamental psychology of what is causing all of this does have, I would say, its roots in the harsh grip from the fragile grip principle, because this is largely I don't know what to do in the situation, so my move is going to be one of these two things, and it's either to give up or squeeze tighter. So it's always squeeze tighter or whatever. But I really do think, though, that, like you said, this is almost too good of an example of what the harsh grip, maybe on the extreme end, looks like. But moving away from Twitter and Musk, there's lots of other companies that have, put the harsh grip into practice, and really has caused people to leave and damage their reputation within their consumer market and the labor market. And it's something that I think that if we wanted to remember what the harsh script does look like, Twitter is a great example of that. So it's fresh in our minds. We'll always remember this kind of dumpster fire or case study, however you want to think of it, that is Twitter, as a good example. But my hope is that the lesson we're going to learn from this, and it's a great example of the harsh grip, is how damaging it can be, and how doesn't matter how big you are, how well hyped you are, how much momentum you have behind you. It's the same kind of fundamental problem that can take down a massive $44 billion corporation or the small mom and pop shop on the corner. That same fundamental harsh grip can be just as damaging regardless of your size.
Well, it's because in both examples, you're dealing with people. And this is the thing that businesses forget about, is that your employees are not a commodity. They are people, and people will respond. An individual person is hard to predict.
Right.
People, as a collective, have patterns of behavior, right? We can predict generally speaking, how a large group of people will react to different situations. And whether you're talking about Twitter or a mom and pop shop, when you forget that your employees are people, and you just try to, well, we've talked about the fragile grip being a relationship, right? Relationship between the employer and the employee. You don't build a healthy relationship by squeezing too tight.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. And you can't maintain sustainability when you see the employees as the enemy.
Right. Yeah.
So, but I think moving on from the fragile grip to some good examples of the next part of the, or sorry, of the harsh grip, moving on to another part of the fragile grip principle, and what you said about employees being commodities. Let's talk about the weak grip. So the weak grip is when you don't hold on to, when you're too loose and you neglect the relationship that you've established with employees, and you end up dropping them. So I think, and layoffs are a great example of that. Now, we've seen some big layoff announcements come from some major companies:
Yeah.
Meta, Amazon, Google, Lyft, Stripe, just to name a few. These are some companies that are laying off a significant part of their employee base, and it's actually disproportionately affecting both HR and DEI positions. But I think it's something that when we have these companies that we revere, and Google's a great example of a company that has been hailed for a long time as the pinnacle of a great employer. But when we see these companies we say, well, we're not Google, but we're still pretty good, and are they that kind of, that kind of fame or that kind of respect, but they're actually just as bad about making these fundamental mistakes, especially with the weak grip, as much smaller, again, companies that exist in our hometowns.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important for us to just really take special notice that sometimes these companies have more of a reputation than actual walk in the walk of being a good employer.
Well, and that's a good point, because you're right. Google is often hailed as the employee experience leader, right? They are who you should emulate. What they do is right. And you should, if you don't know what to do, look to them, right? They are hailed as this pinnacle of engagement and experience. And they do a lot. They do a lot for their employees, and they have some really great initiatives. However, they are just as guilty of this. The moment something starts to go wrong, let's lay people off. Right. Yeah. This is what I find really interesting about both the harsh grip and the weak grip, is that this response is so ingrained in so many businesses that it happens all the time. Anytime that, leading up, we're in or about to be in a recession, right? There's really no denying that at this point. We're halfway through December 2022. It's no longer an if, it's a when. And businesses have been preparing for that. Right. And yes, you need to prepare. You need to figure out how that's going to affect your business. And so what Google, Meta, Amazon, what these big companies have been doing is mass layoffs to prepare for the recessionary period. They're going to turn around in 18 months because recessions don't last forever. And they're going to be looking to hire back employees. They're going to be looking to get back up to speed. We saw this with COVID, was a great example. Businesses yes, there were a lot of businesses that legitimately had to cut costs because COVID was so disruptive and damaging to their business. But there were many that were seeing huge increases in revenue and profits that were still cutting employees because they could. And then moving past 2020 into 2021 and into 2022, we started hearing people say, well, nobody wants to work anymore. And it's not that people didn't want to work, it's that they didn't want to work for you, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, and we'll come back to that, because that is something that, definitely the lessons learning from this phase of COVID is something that will absolutely be something to come back to for sure. But I think, though, that when it comes to some of these companies that we hail as being these leaders or these tastemakers in employee experience, that there's a bit of there can be a bit of the emperor has no clothes kind of situation. Because like, I mean, we've always been skeptical when we hear about companies boasting the perks and benefits of the fun work environment.
Yes.
And again, like, as workforce experts, we always are like, well, yeah, there's value in, like, having, free food and scooters in the hallway. And
I like free food. I'm not gonna crap on free food.
and it looks great when you see, like air
Yeah.
hockey tables or pinball machines in the break rooms, and those things are fine. But those things, as like as your entire engagement or your entire employee experience strategy, are hollow, because they are not what makes a good work environment. I mean, if you put massage chairs, in people's offices, and you allow dogs in the office, those are cool and fun and great, but that does not make up for bosses who micromanage you, or make up for the fact that you may not feel like your thoughts and opinions matter.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't, buy off employees long term with these benefits and these perks, and then not provide them the actual culture environment that's not things, that's respect, that's trust,
Right.
that's encouragement and inspiration. We can't, expect that those be the same things. And when you have these big tastemaker companies like Google and, and like, Meta and all that kind of stuff like that, then, but they're just, it's almost like they do a lot of great stuff, but they promote what they do way better than they actually deliver on what they do.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to realize that, with some of these companies, the layoffs affecting that's coming from the weak grip, and them not really respecting the relationship that they have with their employees, and the fragile nature of it, is a bit of the emperor's not wearing any clothes.
Yeah, and we'll get into it. You mentioned how it's affecting HR and DEI disproportionately, and I want to dive into that specifically in more detail. Not quite yet, but more a reminder to myself and to you to bring it back in, because it's during the hard times that we find out what your actual values are, right? It's in the hard times that we see a person's character, and it's in the hard times that we see a company's character.
Right.
So let's talk about the stable grip,
right?
Because we have had opportunity to see some really good initiatives happening in 2022. There were experiments with 4-day work week, which went really, really well, right? There's a recent NPR article that talks about the anecdotal feedback of firms that actually implemented the 4-day work week, having 86% of them saying that they were likely to continue to provide that, which I think is fantastic, right?
Absolutely.
A CNN article indicated that the companies that actually did this, the companies that participated in this 4-day work week experience rated their own experience overall a 9 out of 10 for productivity and performance, which are the key indicators, right? Yes, it works really well. We know that a 4-day work week is going to go over really well with your workforce, but can you maintain productivity and performance while you are doing this? And, the companies giving themselves a 9 out of 10 saying, yeah, we are maintaining and providing this great benefit. I think those are just really nice examples of that stable grip principle of what can you do during the difficult times to make that relationship with your employees more solid, right? Not squeezing too tight, to support the relationship rather than squeeze or let it drop.
Right. Yes. Because I mean, there were, and thank you for bringing that up, because it is a really important to say it wasn't just dumpster fires and pink slips that was 2022. There were some great examples of how companies were trying to provide that stability and provide that support in the relationship they have with employees. Because and the thing too is, like, this is maybe a sign of how we could look at the cost reduction piece that often inspires the harsh grip and the weak grip. That maybe by reducing the cost of utilities from a 4-day work week, it could be an example of how we could maintain our staffing levels, give people more support, but still be able to reduce costs. So I think that there was a lot to learn around the fragile grip principle, and examples of the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to seeing how the fragile grip principle has worked in 2022, and then ideally we can learn from this for 2023.
Yeah.
But let's actually pick up on the point that you made about that we talked about more than once about the DEI and HR role hitting layoffs. So why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, so this is a big one for me, because it didn't just happen this year, but with tech, a lot of these big companies, Meta, Amazon, Twitter, like all there
Microsoft,
has
Google.
what's that? Microsoft, yeah,
Google.
like most big major corporations over the last couple of years have been increasing the language that they use around diversity, equity, and inclusion, talking about how important DEI is, how it is a core value of their business, and how they are dedicated to ensuring that they become more representative, that they become more inclusive, and that they create this sense of belonging in their workplaces. This has been the language that we have heard from these large companies for, well, unfortunately, for ages. But it seemed over the last few years, it really has ramped up as society has started to say, you need to be more inclusive. You need to be more representative. Why we take such exception to the layoffs hitting HR and DEI specifically is that it puts a lie to everything that they have said. Right? It's not that these are the most important parts of your business. They are crucial parts of your business. Absolutely. There are lots of crucial parts of your business. But what drives me so up the wall is that we have this, they've received such praise for, oh, Microsoft has this great initiative and they are dedicated to increasing representation, diversity, equity, inclusion. We celebrate the announcement and then we forget about it. Right? If you want to know what a company values, watch what they do during a recession. Right? Watch what they do when they run into a little bit of trouble. Laying off your DEI departments, your HR departments after spending so much time and energy promoting the fact that you are, this is a core value for us. Well, that's a load of garbage, right? You cannot have, if it was a core value for you, you would invest in it. Mm-hmm. If it was just a marketing exercise, yeah, you'll cut it when it's no longer important to you, which is what we're seeing. And it's such hypocrisy that is largely going to go unnoticed. And that's what drives me nuts.
Yeah, because and the thing is that we're these cuts are these cuts are happening now. It's not like it's 2023 and things are really bad. It's that these are cuts happening right now.
They've been happening for weeks.
And what's concerning is that is not only that they're saying one thing and then doing another, but it's that when you have these big tastemaker companies, that are hailed for their leadership in the future of work and corporate
Yeah.
culture, then and they're the ones cutting this, then other companies, smaller companies, look to them for leadership. And then they're saying, well, if Facebook and Google and Microsoft, are making these cuts, then maybe we can too. But because a lot of companies made really big diversity pledges,
Yeah.
in late spring 2022, especially after the George Floyd murder, and then reversing on this. And after hailing DEI and HR employee experience as being what we are all about, this is the DNA of our company, to dropping any related initiatives and cutting staff, or even like there's even articles in SHRM, like about whole DEI departments that are being closed and laying off pretty much everybody. And this is again happening now in 2022.
Yeah.
And I think and you made an excellent point, because if you want to find out what companies are really made of, the ones that are saying we are leaders in the future of work, employee experience, and inclusive and diverse workplaces, turning around and then saying, well, the first to go is DEI, is a sign that the companies don't see diversity, equity, inclusion as a core component, as their DNA. It's an appendix.
Yes.
It's not an essential part of their culture. And I think that there are some, and we said this early on, and lots of other people did too, that some companies are using these pledges for diversity, especially after the George Floyd murder, that are saying that companies were using it as a branding opportunity, as reputation management, and they weren't going to walk the walk. Well, the ones that have the DEI as the first to go, they are the ones that obviously are seeing it as a branding opportunity, because because they're cutting it as soon as things get slightly difficult or in the potential of getting difficult. And if you want to find out if the emperor's wearing clothes, then that is going to be probably one of the best signs right there.
You're right. I mean, in the 2 years since George Floyd's death, we've seen this huge increase in commitments, right?
Yeah.
To being more diverse, to representation, to companies calling out on social issues and social injustice, and really positioning themselves as these, innovative is the wrong word. What am I looking for?
I think like a tastemaker is the word that I used.
Yeah, right. Like, it's just, it rings so hollow. And what drives me, like I said it before, what bothers me so much is that we as consumers and the general public have such short attention spans, that this inconsistency, this hypocrisy is never going to reach mainstream knowledge, right? The awareness of it will always take a back seat to the marketing and promotions that these companies, the public face that they put forward.
Yeah. And I think that it's something that, like, to me, I always find it surprising when we get into difficult times that they cut HR. We're going through cuts, we're going through downsides, and we're going through highly stressful workplaces, we're going through higher burnout. So let's cut HR. And I'm always like, to me, that's like a trucking company. To save money, the first thing they cut is their maintenance and service department. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't really kind of make sense that you would think that if but again, part of it too is maybe how they respect or don't respect or even use HR properly.
If
it's
you
mostly
see
about
HR only as an expense, as purely as, just making sure that you're barely legally compliant so that you don't get sued, and then doing as much as you possibly can to take advantage of that. Yeah, okay, you're a garbage employer, and you're going because you treat people like garbage.
Yeah. So I just think though that there's very telling. We can learn a lot this year, especially around who truly values the employee experience and DEI by how they prioritize cuts. And I think that we as consumers should be taking more attention, putting more attention into looking at that. And hopefully that won't be a hard information to find, but it's something that we need to definitely be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think kind of the third thing that we might want to say is kind of the big lesson that we can learn from this past year is kind of about how we maybe need to put more effort into training our leaders and managers. So going back to Musk again and other owners and managers, there's a lot of people that I think think leadership is easy, or think that leadership is something that you learn once when you're 20 and then it carries on through forever, not realizing that that as things evolve, as things change, how you manage, how you lead, how you understand those that are in your charge, that has to evolve too.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to be better preparing and better training our managers. And a great example of that is talking about, and you kind of mentioned this kind of earlier on, but talking about the return to the office that we saw in the spring and summer.
Yeah.
Because when we did a whole episode on work from home, the problem or the solution, so check that out, that episode out too. But a lot of businesses claimed that going back to the office and reducing remote work was about was about improving the company, or bringing everything back to how things ran well. But a lot of it, and we've even had discussions with people that said there's some information about how people work better in the office and this and that. And one thing that we always come back to is say whether the information, the stats, the data tells you people work better in the office or people work better from home, those are actually beside the point. The real question is, are the managers and leaders and owners trained and able to inspire, motivate, and improve productivity where, whether people are at home or at the office? Because if stats say, well, everyone works better from the office, well, is that because the managers only know how to manage them from the office? Then that doesn't prove, if so, that doesn't prove that working from the office is superior. It just proves that we're not properly investing in training our leaders and managers.
Yeah, and you said something that I think gets to the heart of part of the problem. Of they want to go back,
right?
We hear this all the time around businesses wanting to get back to normal, get back to business, get back to the way things were. Here's the reality. You cannot go back. Things have changed. Full stop. Expectations have changed. Full stop. What we have seen in many instances and with businesses that we've had direct communication and working with, and businesses, and what we've seen in kind of mainstream communication media, the businesses, by and large, the ones that were forcing everybody back to the office, regardless of productivity, regardless of preference, generally were using the arguments of, we need to get people back to the office, we need to get back to business, we need to get back to normal. People need to return to the office to get back to the way things were. We need to change the way that we approach business, the way that we approach our employees, right? Expectations around competitive, sufficient, and equitable. That's what the workforce is looking for, right? Competitive, sufficient, and equitable in compensation, competitive, sufficient, and equitable in the way that they engage in work. And if you are not willing to change the way that you approach things, if you keep trying to push people back to the way things were in 2018, 2019, you will not be as successful as you should be. you will continue to run into significant resistance because you are not meeting the expectations of your employees. Getting back to normal is not the goal. It's finding out what is the new normal. How can I adapt? How can I meet people where they are? And that is the fundamental problem that I've seen with businesses that, using the remote working as the example, just forcing people back to the office because that's what the manager is comfortable with. To your point about training, we've done such a poor job as businesses in providing management skills to people. We think that, success in a position means that that person will be successful managing. We'll promote them and let them manage that position. Management skills are a unique skill set that can be taught, that some people are naturally gifted in, and they can kind of figure it out on their own. The majority of people need to be taught how to effectively manage people, especially as so many factors of our workplace have changed because so much is going on and there's constant evolution and constant change.
Yeah. And these are points that we definitely do bring up an awful lot, because the idea of preparing people to have success in their role is something that often we say, well, yeah, you have to do that with employees, but you have to do that with managers. You have to do that with leaders. You have to do that, and that should happen all the way at the top. That the skills you learned how to lead people 20 years ago are not going to translate in the new realities of the future of work, and this new need to improve employee experience as a fundamental business activity. The old traditional ways are not going to work. And if you think that you can just figure it out, or you think that only employees need training and managers don't, then you are grossly misunderstanding how organizational culture and everything works. Now, one thing I think that we should also, I'm going to jump into the recap soon because our time's almost up. But one thing I also think that is important for us to mention and celebrate almost is that our conversations seem to be having a lot of success. Our listenership is steadily increasing, and we even ranked on Feedspot's, our podcast ranked on Feedspot's 15 top Canadian workplace podcasts. We're number 6. Pretty good for having less than 10 episodes.
So thank you to those who are listening, because that's you doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we're very excited for, and what we've also learned that these are important topics and important insights, and the fact that we bring a psychological and historical perspective and new ideas to these issues, I think is really kind of resonating. So again, thank you to you listening. You're inspiring us with paying attention and really making these things important to you. And we'll put a link to that list in the show notes, and both on YouTube and on our podcast. So I think I'll wrap everything up and kind of cover the. I guess we covered kind of 3 main areas.
I've ranted enough. You can wrap up.
Yeah. So the 3 main areas, or the 3 main lessons that we can learn from 2022 can first be really described as great examples of the fragile grip principle that really played out and will continue to play out as we move into 2023. So when it comes to the harsh grip, the realities of Twitter and Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter really are great examples, maybe a little bit too good, of examples of the harsh grip. The layoffs and everything being hit that are hitting Google and Meta and other big tech companies are kind of the great examples of what happens with the weak grip. Even these companies that we look to for leadership are making just the same fundamental mistakes that our mom and pop shops are, down the street. And there is some hope that things like the 4-day work week and those types of experiments are great examples of the stable grip and how we can better support the fragile relationship that we have with employees to maintain, prosperity and success, combined success long term. Another great lesson that we can learn from this year are what companies really think about DEI and the value. Many of the biggest players that wanted to lead change were also the first to cut their DEI departments and teams and positions. And what this does is this paints a very clear picture to all of us about what they really wanted from DEI. And to many, it was more about brand management than actual transformative change. And I guess the last lesson is that we clearly haven't been training our managers and leadership to handle the future of work. So things like, handle, work from home and remote working, or the shift towards improving employee experience, and most importantly, understanding the new employee expectations. Because things like forcing people back to the old normal are great examples of how we are prioritizing the comfort level of antiquated management skills over the future of work in our long-term success. So I think that pretty much covers it. Anything else, James?
Nope, that's good.
All right.
Thanks, Toby.
Great. So that about does it for us. So for a full archive of our podcast and access to the video version hosted on our YouTube channel, visit roman3.ca/podcast. Thanks for joining us.
For more information on topics like these, don't forget to visit us at roman3.ca. Side effects of this podcast may include improved retention, high productivity, increased market share, employees breaking out in spontaneous dance, dry mouth, aversion to the sound of James's voice, desire to find a better podcast.